Thanksgiving morning always arrived with a whisper of melancholy. Not quite sadness, just a quiet ache that curled around my ribs, like an old song I hadn't sung in years. I'd been up since 6, slow roasting a turkey in the community kitchen downstairs at the Lexington home for seniors. The air smelled of rosemary garlic and faint floor polish, a blend of comfort and antiseptic reality. This year, I brought out my mother's ivory linens. The edges were hand-stitched. I laid them out on the long dining table in the shared hall and set the china gently, each plate carrying the weight of memory. The nurses smiled when they saw me. One asked, "You setting up again this year?" "Gloria," I smiled back. "Tradition matters," I said softly, "even if the family doesn't always show up. But this year, Mason said he'd come. My only son. He texted just a few days ago. Mom will be there for dinner. Laura and the boys, too. Can't wait." No exclamation points. But that was Mason. Composed, efficient, never overly emotional. Even as a child, he smiled more with his mouth than his eyes. Still, I believed him. Because mothers always believe even when their children give them every reason not to. I set 5 place cards, 1 for Mason, 1 for his wife Laura, 2 for my grandsons Ryan and Caleb, and 1 for me. I wrote my name in cursive. My hands trembled slightly, but the blue ink held. I invited the nurses too. Not formally, just said, "If you're around after your shift, there's a plate waiting." They had saved my life earlier this year when the stroke hit. They fed me soup when I couldn't lift a spoon. Held my hand when I cried quietly in the dark. Mason, he'd called. Once. Said he was swamped at work. I sat down gazing at the soft candlelight and cranberry sauce chilling in its dish. The silver ladle gleamed beside the gravy boat. A perfect Thanksgiving scene, waiting to be filled with laughter, or at least the memory of it. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have guessed, was how cold a familiar hand could feel, and how this table once set with love would become the stage for betrayal. At exactly 3:58 p.m., the front doors of the Lexington home creaked open. The cold air of Kentucky winter swept through the hallway. Mason always arrived on time, especially when punctuality painted him in a good light. "Mom," he said, leaning in just enough for a quick hug, careful not to crease his tailored shirt. "Smells amazing in here." I returned the hug softly, feeling how stiff his back was. How careful. Laura followed with her tight-lipped smile, eyes scanning the hall like she was inspecting a rental property. The boys, Ryan and Caleb, mumbled greetings and made a beeline for the soda table I decorated with glass bottles and striped paper straws. They didn't say thank you. I didn't expect them to. "Come sit down," I said, guiding them to the table I'd spent all morning preparing. Mason paused. He looked at the candles, the handwritten name cards, the polished silverware. "You really went all out," he said flatly. "Must have taken you all morning." I nodded. I'd stopped hoping for praise from my son long ago. Just acknowledgement would have been nice. Dinner began like a polite play. Laura complimented the cranberry sauce. The boys shoveled stuffing into their mouths while half scrolling on their phones. Mason made a few remarks about work. The firm was busy, clients were demanding, court filings were backed up. His words were polished, but his jaw was tight. Something buzzed beneath the surface, some hidden agenda waiting. I felt it. I always felt it before it happened. Midway through the meal, as I was refilling water glasses, Mason cleared his throat and pulled a thin manila envelope from his jacket. He slid it across the table like a contract deal. "I brought something for you to look at," he said. I froze for a split second. "It's just some paperwork about the Sycamore house." I blinked. The old family house. "You know it's been empty for years," he said, tone casual. "We figured it'd make sense to transfer the deed. Less hassle for you down the line." I sat slowly, my hands curling slightly under the table. Transfer it. To who, I asked. To us, Laura interjected. It's just logical. We're nearby, we can maintain it. That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was my mother's. She raised 4 kids under that roof. I spent summers there, winters too. It was memory, not inventory. I'd like to read it first, I said softly. Of course, Mason replied quickly, voice just a little too tight. Take your time, Laura added. It'd just be easier if we could wrap this up before the end of the year. For tax reasons. There it was. The rush. The motive. The turkey now sat like lead in my stomach. This wasn't a dinner. This was a negotiation. And I was the asset. The manila envelope sat on the table like a ticking clock. I didn't open it. Instead, I picked up the gravy boat and poured it gently over Mason's plate, pretending nothing had shifted. But everything had. The candles flickered as if sensing the shift. Laura's posture was tighter now, her fork tapping slowly. The boys were unusually quiet. I suppose even they could feel it. The room wasn't just filled with turkey and cranberry sauce anymore. It was filled with expectation and calculation. Mason took a sip of water. It's not a big deal, Mom, he said lightly. Just a formality. My voice was steady. No, it's not. He looked up, blinked. It's a house, I continued. My house, not a formality. Silence. Ryan and Caleb finally looked up from their phones. Even Laura's wine glass froze midair. You don't trust me? Mason asked. His voice had dropped an octave. I folded my napkin and placed it gently beside my plate. I trust you, I said, to do what's best for yourself. There it was, the truth he hadn't expected to hear. He leaned back in his chair. It creaked loudly in protest. His eyes darted toward Laura, who gave a slight shake of her head, lips pressed thin. That's when I saw it. The plan unraveling. They thought I would be frail, passive. But I wasn't the same woman who'd gone into the hospital last spring. I had learned how to sit in silence without surrendering, how to stay calm when people wanted to provoke me, how to defend myself without raising my voice. I said I'll read it, I repeated. But I'm not signing anything tonight. Mason's fork paused midair. His knuckles whitened around the handle. Mom, he said, tone clipped. You're being difficult. I looked him in the eye. No, I'm being clear. And that's when it happened. He stood up. Fast. The chair scraped backward with a screech. I come here, he barked. I bring my family, I try to help. You came to take, I interrupted. You always do. There wasn't even a pause. His hand moved before anyone could register. Across my cheek. Hot, sharp, unforgivable. The slap echoed across the room louder than any of his words ever had. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My hand lifted slowly to my cheek. The sting bloomed under my skin like fire trapped just beneath the surface. Mason's hand had left more than a mark. It left something that shattered sound and replaced it with silence. Laura's mouth hung open, frozen. The boys sat motionless, eyes no longer glued to screens, but locked on me like they were seeing me for the first time. I straightened my back. I adjusted the sweater draped around my shoulders. And then I cleared the glass that had tipped beside the gravy boat. I'll clean this up, I said. My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't weak either. It was in still. Mom. Mason started, but his words collapsed mid-sentence. Maybe even he realized something had shifted. Not outside, but in me. I walked the ladle to the sink, just 5, maybe 6 steps. But in those steps I felt something click shut inside me. Not snap, just shut, like a door that's been left ajar for years, finally closed with a soft, decisive click. Let them sit in that silence. Let them stew in the awkward weight of what he had done. and what I did not say, because there was nothing left to say. Nothing they'd be willing to hear anyway. Back in my room, I stood before the mirror. My cheek was red, puffy. I pressed 2 fingers lightly against the skin, confirming what my heart already knew. My son, the boy I once rocked through fevers, kissed goodnight, taught to tie his shoelaces, had raised his hand to me. And he hadn't hesitated. He hadn't flinched. He had done it in front of his children, his wife, on Thanksgiving Day, over a house. I closed my eyes, breathed in, breathed out. Then I opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside, wrapped in a scarf, was a small black case. I opened it, and there it was. The camera, hidden discreetly on the bookshelf in the dining room. One of the nurses had helped me install it a month ago. Just in case, she had said gently. After the stroke, something in me changed. I no longer expected people to do the right thing just because they should. I began preparing, quietly, carefully. The dining hall was quiet now. The voices, the chairs, the cutlery, all silent. But I wasn't. Not on the inside. I opened my desk drawer. Everything was where I'd left it, precisely folded, clearly labeled. The navy blue folder lay on top. I had organized it weeks ago. Not out of paranoia, but out of clarity. I knew this day might come. I didn't expect the slap. But I had expected the ask, the pressure, the paperwork, the assumption that because I was old, I was also weak. They were wrong. I placed the folder gently on the desk. Inside, a notarized letter, the deed to the Sycamore house, the confirmed transfer form, all signed, all filed, not to Mason, but to the Central Kentucky Nurses Legacy Fund, the very people who had seen me through the worst year of my life. People who held my hand when I couldn't move it. People who listened when my voice returned as a whisper. People who remembered I was more than a patient. 3 weeks ago, I'd signed it all away. To kindness. To care. To the ones who never once made me feel like a burden. I took out my laptop and attached the camera footage. It was crisp, time-stamped, clear. I added a photo I had just taken the side of my face, puffy and bruised. Then I added a scan of the deed transfer. Finally, I opened a new email window. To the firm where Mason worked. Subject: Thanksgiving incident, Associate Mason Harper, message. This is what happened during Thanksgiving dinner. The footage is real. The bruise is fresh. The house no longer his concern. I clicked send. Then I opened a second window and emailed my lawyer, Natalie. A firebrand. Sharp, fearless, and fiercely protective of the elderly. I kept it simple. Use this if you need it. I'm done being quiet. And that was that. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. The shaking had stopped. There was stillness now. A powerful, profound stillness, like when you stop holding your breath after years. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and watched the wind whip across the leafless trees outside my window. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I had finally told the truth without saying a word. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I stayed in bed a little longer than usual. Not because I was tired. My body still ached the way it always did after holidays, but my mind felt light. Like something inside had finally loosened, untangled. I sat with a cup of tea watching the sunlight stretch across the hardwood floor of my little room. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees like an invisible river. Inside, the silence was warm. The nurses passed by my door. Some peeked in, eyes soft with unspoken understanding. Others paused to offer a knowing smile. Word travels fast in places like this, especially when someone's child raises a hand and someone else finds the courage to stand. "Do you need anything?" Gloria, one nurse, asked gently. I smiled. "No, I've already got what I need." That afternoon, I stepped into the community garden. The vines were dry, the soil resting for winter. But even in dormancy, there was something alive here, something stubborn and true. I sat on a wooden bench and wrapped my scarf tighter. In my pocket, I had a note card. 32 missed calls. That's what my phone said. 32 in just 2 days, all from Mason. He'd left voicemails too. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I already knew how they'd go. First disbelief, then justification, then panic, maybe even guilt disguised as concern. But I didn't want any of it. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. That evening, I wrote a short message to the director of the Nurses Legacy Fund. Thank you for what you do. I hope this gift makes someone feel seen. The way your nurses made me feel with warmth, with dignity, with respect. Gloria Harper. I sealed it and left it on the table by the door. That night, I didn't check my voicemail. I folded 2 more scarves, soft, warm blue. Each loop, each stitch quiet, small, but together strong. Just like me. 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood in front of the mirror in my new room. It was smaller than the house on Sycamore Street. Much smaller, but brighter somehow. The air didn't smell like turkey or sage or stuffing. There were no ivory linens pressed on tables, no name cards in delicate cursive. And yet I felt fuller than I had in decades. The Lexington home had changed, too. They had built a new wing funded in part by an anonymous donation last winter. Of course, the director knew who the donor was, but no one made a fuss about it. That's how I liked it. Outside in the main hall, the staff had arranged a modest Thanksgiving setup. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pumpkin pie or two. Nothing fancy, but everything warm. Janet, one of the nurses, walked in holding a scarf. She'd been learning how to knit. She handed it to me, eyes bright nervous. "It's not perfect," she whispered. The scarf was blue and soft, a few drop stitches here and there, but it was beautiful. "It's perfect," I said. She cried anyway. As we sat down at the table, one of the younger nurses stood to say grace. Her voice was steady, eyes closed, but just before finishing, she added something extra, something I hadn't expected. "And thank you, Lord, for the people who remind us that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort." Then she looked at me. Not for long, just a glance. But it was enough. My throat tightened, but I smiled. Later that night, I sat by the window with a cup of cocoa. Outside, the wind danced through the bare trees. No one had called. Not Mason, not Laura, not the boys. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. They had made their choice. And I had made mine. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. It came from the Central Kentucky Nurses Legacy Fund. Inside was a photo. 3 women sat on the porch of an old white house. They wore flannel robes, held coffee mugs, and laughed like sleep and sorrow were distant memories. It was the Sycamore house. My old house. The one Mason tried to take. It didn't look grand anymore, a little weathered. The paint faded in corners. But it looked lived in, cared for, loved. Below the photo, a caption in simple print: "Retreat Weekend for Rural Nurses." Hope begins with rest. I stared at the picture for a long time. Then I placed it in a frame. Not a family portrait, but it meant more than any family photo I'd ever owned. That evening, I ignored another call from Mason, the 33rd. I didn't need to hear his voice to know what it would say. I'd heard enough in one slap to last a lifetime. Instead, I lit a candle, sat at my little desk, and began knitting again. One loop, one stitch, one memory at a time. The bruise on my cheek had faded long ago, but the memory never left. Not the sting, not the silence, not the shift that followed. There was no apology. There were voicemails dozens piling up like leaves no one bothered to rake. But not once did he say, "I'm sorry." And I stopped needing him to, because what I'd found in its place was something better than forgiveness. It was clarity. It was freedom. It was peace. That Thanksgiving, I didn't make a turkey. I didn't iron the linens, didn't arrange name cards, didn't hope for anyone to walk through my door. Instead, I walked myself to the main hall, wearing a blue scarf that Janet had knitted just for me. The staff had set up a simple spread again: chicken pies, some roasted carrots. One of the nurses brought her little daughter, who sat beside me, and asked if she could help knit. I laughed. "Of course," I said, "but we start with patience." Midway through the meal, the director stood to speak. She thanked the staff, thanked the donors. Then she looked at me. And a very special thanks, she said to someone whose courage reminded us that dignity doesn't come from what we keep, but what we choose to give. A pause. Then quiet applause. Gentle, warm, real. I didn't cry. I just bowed my head. Because for the first time in my life, I had nothing left to prove. I wasn't trying to be loved. I wasn't trying to be seen. I wasn't trying to keep a family together that had long fallen apart. I was simply being. Still. Standing. Whole. That night, I sat by the window cocoa warming my palms, watching the wind dance through leafless trees. No one had called. Not Mason. Not Laura. Not the boys. And for the first time, it didn't matter. They had made their choices. I had made mine. I reached for a stack of note cards I kept in a drawer, wrote one short message, not to my son, not to my family, but to the nurses. Thank you for making me feel seen when the people I loved forgot how to look at me. I signed it Gloria Harper. Then I sealed the envelope and left it near the window. Outside, the world kept moving, but I'd stopped chasing it. I no longer waited for forgiveness or reunion or redemption. I didn't need closure from the people who caused the pain. I had made peace with myself, and that peace, that quiet, steady knowing, was mine. The Sycamore House now served as a healing place for nurses across the state. They sent updates often, photos, stories. Once they sent a thank you quilt, hand-stitched with every panel signed by a nurse who'd stayed there. I kept it folded on the end of my bed, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that dignity doesn't come from titles or money or family name. It comes from walking away, quietly, gracefully, powerfully when love turns into ownership. If you're still watching, maybe you've lived something like this. Maybe someone forgot your value. Maybe they used your kindness like a stepping stone. Maybe they called it love while slowly erasing you. I know what that feels like. To shrink in your own home. To silence your voice so they can be louder. To hand over parts of yourself until there's barely anything left. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to fight with fists. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to beg to be loved. Sometimes the greatest power is in your silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of knowing who you are and who you'll never let anyone make you forget again. And I gave up a house, but I kept my soul. I lost a son, but I found a sisterhood. I was slapped. But I never hit back because I didn't need to. I had already won. So if you are out there, sitting in silence, feeling invisible, afraid your story is over, let me tell you, it's not. You are not finished. You are not forgotten. You are not weak. You are the author. and you can still rewrite the ending.